It's like they're like on the Claudia side.
Right, well, welcome to this panel discussion. I deliberately waited a little to give you a chance to listen to the soundscape, which of course is part of the installation that we're going to talk about. My name is Claudia Molitor. I'm Professor of German here at the IMLR. And I hugely look forward to a discussion with the team that's behind the installation, 1,000 Words for Weather. And I hope most of you will have seen it, will have heard it. It's upstairs in the Senate House Library, on floors 4, 5, and 6. And yes, what you're listening to now is very much part of it. Just to give you a little bit of context, the installation is a collaboration between Artangel and the Senate House Library. Artangel, their mission is to create and support artistic projects that respond to the environment that we live in, and their motto is extraordinary art in unexpected places. And of course, Senate House Library, in a sense, is an unexpected place, because it's not a place where you expect art, you know, or creative spirits to reign. But so it is a depository of knowledge, but it also houses the School of Advanced Study, and the School of Advanced Study is a hub for the humanities. And the idea of the whole humanities being about the human, about human experience, ties in very much with this artistic endeavor of Artangel. So we are very glad about this collaboration. So that's the framework, but the project at the center of tonight's discussion is 1,000 Words for Weather, and it's conceived and led by Jessica Lee, who's an environmental historian and author, and she's a winner of multiple awards for her writing. And she's been working with a multilingual team of poets and translators and writers. You see some of them on Zoom, and some of them here in the room. The idea, just in a nutshell, I think the idea was to capture the experience of weather, to make that experience translatable by finding words for it, then to make it even more translatable, to share it even more by translating these words into different languages, and then to add another act of translation, which is to translate it into abstract sound. So that's just so as you know what's going to come. We're going to talk about this in much more detail, of course. So the collaboration with the translators and poets is then enhanced by the collaboration also with Claudia Molitor, who is a composer and who has been working very much on the soundscape and I was going to say music, but it is really more a soundscape that you can hear. Right. The installation, I just need to mention this because I was very impressed by it. The installation has received a rave review in The Observer in June. There was a piece written by Laura Cumming who called it mesmerizingly subtle. And I think, that's exactly what it is. So it's wonderful to have you all here. And I understand it's the first time that you meet in person, which is also amazing, that a project that is so collaborative can work without people actually meeting. It's fascinating to me. Something I'm sure we'll come back to. Before we launch into the discussion, let's just make sure we've got you all introduced. So I've mentioned Jessica, Claudia. If you could just introduce yourselves, your name, your languages. That would be lovely.
So my name is Leo Boix. I'm a poet, a translator, and I was born in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. So my mother tongue is Spanish, and I translate mostly poetry from Latin America in Spanish into English.
I'm Iris Colomb. I'm a poet and a translator, and the language I translate with and into is French. So I translate from English to French and from French to English.
I'm Ayça Turkoglu. I'm a literary translator from German and Turkish.
Can you speak up?
I'm a literary translator from German and Turkish.
Thank you. And online we have
Marta, do you want to get there?
Yeah, my name is Marta Dziurosz. I am a translator from and into Polish, which is my mother tongue, and a writer and a publishing professional.
Izdihar?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Izdihar, and I am English-Arabic translator on this art project. I've been working as a translator for about 15 years since I graduated with a master's degree in translation.
Nikhat?
Hi, my name is Nikhat, and I worked on the Bangla and Urdu translations for this project. I feel like I've worked with translation my whole life, being bilingual background. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, let's delve into it. Yeah, Jessica, tell us about your project. What was your first idea? What brought you to this project, and how did it start off?
Yeah, so it was October 2020 when Michael Morris approached me to ask me if I would be interested in creating something about the weather, I think is what he said to me. He said it could be whatever you want, which is a very rare kind of proposal, I think, for anyone in any kind of creative industry, to be told you can make whatever you want and just sort of develop it as you go, and you don't need to have a concrete idea to start with. So I started with this idea, okay, I need to think of something to do with the weather. But I think at the time, I was thinking a lot about language, and being a multilingual person, I wanted to sort of, work on a project that would allow me to devote my attention to that the strangeness of living across different languages. So when we started talking about the idea, we immediately started talking about, okay, when we're speaking about multiple languages and translation, what about a dictionary? What would that look like? And so we started with this idea of, I think the working title was an intimate dictionary of the weather at the start, wanting to think about, how do we put into words that very bodily feeling, that very personal and emotional and often drawing on our memories and our homes kind of sensation of thinking about the weather, and how do you then communicate that to others, particularly at a time when I think, at least I think in a time of climate crisis, it becomes really important that we have conversations with each other about the weather, and not just within individual communities. And for me, like, my life is, I come from an immigrant background with, multilingual family, and I think a lot of people have that experience. And how would I speak to my grandparents, for example, about climate change and about our experience of the environment across languages? What would that look like? And that sort of question kept haunting me. And so I wanted to create a project that was about that sort of in-betweenness of the things we can share with one another, and the things we can translate, and the things that we can't quite, that we're reaching towards, but maybe we miss or we lose along the way. And I wanted something that would play in that space. So that's where we started.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you worked with, so you chose your team, and you then worked with prompts. How did you work out what to prompt? Can I just ask, are we audible, or should we use a microphone?
We're okay? Okay.
Good.
So yeah, I had the idea that, okay, well, if we're going to create this sort of dictionary of the weather, there need to be some limitations. I feel like, creating something into the sort of void can be really daunting, and I knew that if I was going to bring this idea to this whole group of other people, and it was, at the time, I didn't know what the final product would be. So when I reached out to everyone, I feel like my first emails to all of you were really cryptic. We're working on this project, we don't know what the final outcome will be, but we want to play with these ideas, and would you like to translate some words? Is sort of like how I think it was pitched. And so I knew that that was already vague enough. So we decided to give it some shape I wrote 10 prompts for 10 languages, essentially, and assigned everyone a prompt. And the prompts were things like the seasons, but also things like the past and the future, because I really wanted to think about how much environment and thinking about weather in particular, how different is it, say, now from, perhaps when we were children. I felt like that would bring out some kind of interesting resonance, and thinking about the future, I feel like that's a scary prospect when we're talking about climate change, so I wanted to bring that in, and then I included joy, because I think we need that, and also grief, because given the themes involved, it felt like we needed that kind of balance. So when everyone was brought on board, I offered them all a prompt, and said they could do whatever they wanted with that, come up with 10 words in their language according to that prompt, and once we'd gathered each of our 10 words, we would begin the act of translating all of each other's words into each other's languages until we ended up with 1,000. So
Brilliant idea. So before we get to the translation part, can I ask you to talk about how you received these prompts, and how you, and maybe if each of you could give us 5 of your words that you chose, because then we'll get a bit of an idea that it isn't too literal, probably, what you did. So, yeah? Leo, do you want to start?
Yeah, of course. So I remember when I received your email, I went for, I got the seasons prompt, and so I decided to go with summer. Mostly because I come from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I left Argentina in the summer, and I came here and it was winter, and that was really quite a shock. And the summers, I've been living here for many years, and every time I go back to Argentina, I notice that the summers are more extreme, they're wetter, they're hotter, and longer, and it's really scary. So on the one hand, I always go in winter to visit my family, winter here, so, and it's summer, so summer conveys sort of idea of family and sort of love and all those things, but also, the scary part of the changes that are happening really fast. So I decided to go with the summer, and I wrote 10 words. For instance, one was insolación, and I wrote too much sun intake, periodo durante el cual una superficie recibe la luz del sol. Another one, luminoso, que irradia luz de alta claridad, de afanidad. Humedad absoluta, concentración del vapor de agua, pesadez del aire, del cuerpo. And last one, árido, árida. Falta de precipitación o sequía cuando la evaporación excede la precipitación. So, yes.
Thank you very much. And I like that you didn't translate into English, because even if we're not fluent speakers of Spanish, there's a lot that sort of resonates, and I think that's fantastic. Thank you. Iris.
So the prompt that I was working with was future, and so in my response to that, I was thinking about time and the idea of rupture, and then other elements to do with things being constant, and sort of thinking about these things also to do with expectation in relation to weather, and also some ideas to do with with sort of like excess, and the idea of like things sort of like being out of our control and being sort of like this sort of like person in an environment which is far bigger than we are, and being affected by that. So those were the sort of like things I was thinking about, and it led me to choose words that resonated with me in French, that then actually when I translated them, it didn't, some of them I was kind of disappointed, which always happens. So actually the translation process was really interesting in that way for me. And it was also about the sound of the words as well. So this kind of like resonant sound and sense sort of combination. So some of them were rafale, brusque accélération du vent, gust, sudden rush of wind. And then more towards the idea of like rupture, this sort of like threat, foudre, décharge électrique aérienne, lightning, aerial electric discharge. I had the word horizon, limite de la vue, horizon, limit of sight, and sort of because this sort of idea of like this unknown aspect and uncontrollable aspect, that's quite pessimistic, I guess. But yeah, here we are. And then maybe one last one that I could mention is sort of still in this sort of idea, towards this idea of uncertainty, halo, auréole lumineuse diffuse, halo, diffuse circle of light. So yeah, your few points.
Thank you very much.
I was working with 2 languages, and I think the words that I decided to, the themes that I decided to choose, I think related for me, they were really kind of bound up with my own relationships with those languages. So my first language that I started working on with the project was Turkish. So naturally I chose the theme of grief, because that's what that really kind of signifies my relationship with Turkish, I think. Like, I grew up speaking Turkish initially, and then I kind of stopped speaking it, so there was a loss of the language, and I had to relearn it. So it's kind of bound up with sort of feelings of generally feeling quite fraudulent, which is really true. But that was something that this project was really good for, is that we were kind of working with our languages as we use them. There was no kind of level that we had to be at, definitely, to kind of prove ourselves to be sufficiently fluent, or we didn't have to be kind of 100% native speakers. We were kind of using the language that we had, which I really liked. So grief, I'll read you some of my Greek words. Yes. So I was thinking both about kind of weather events that typically provoke kind of less than cheery response, but also I was thinking about the way, like, the weather reflects our kind of feelings inside and things like that. So I had bishumlamak, which means to pour with rain, and that's not a common word. I looked it up in a dictionary of sort of special dialect words that are used by a specific author whose name I've now forgotten. Yasha Kemal, yes, him. So I thought I'd just kind of explore and use whatever words I could find. It's like sırılsıklam, çok ıslak, her yanı ıslak. That means sodden. Turkish has this great habit of making these really good kind of extreme words, sırılsıklam, repeating the sounds. Lodos, güney yönünden esen, İstanbul'a kışın sıcak hava getiren rüzgar. That is a wind that blows in winter in Istanbul, and it blows from the south, and it creates like, suddenly you get this kind of like tropical weather. I remember it being like Christmas Eve and it was about 20 degrees, and I was really confused. And that for me kind of reflected the way that you're kind of blindsided by the oddness of weather events, particularly in sort of an era of climate crisis. But for German, I picked spring because my relationship with German is completely different. That's the language that I chose. that's the language that I studied, and that's the language I work from a lot more. So I picked spring because that is my favourite season, and it's all things hopeful, etc. So I picked die Knospe, so that's a bud, unentwickelte Blüte oder Blätter einer Pflanze, and because I'm a gardener, I picked der Nachtfrost, which is night frost. It's a scary thing. Das Schmelzwasser, which is snow melt. Oh, and the word I liked most was leuchtend, Licht eines Frühlingsabends, which is what it is to me. It's like the light on a spring evening is kind of sort of the first sort of hopeful light. And I always think of when you see forget-me-nots on a spring evening, and the colour is just absolutely bizarre. Like they really stand out to you, and there's something magical about that. And I wanted to include it for that. And that's it.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Marta, can we hear from you?
Sure. I was sort of thrilled to have a few prompts to choose from. I think Jessica gave me a few options, and I pounced on autumn because autumn is the best time of the year, objectively, I think. It is also my season because I'm a Libra, so it's autumn, is when I sort of feel like I'm, like it's my time, frankly. And also, I think in my case, related to quite a lot of homesickness, I think. I'm not sure whether all of the other participants felt that too, but I have quite a conflict as to which weather should I be writing about, whether which home climate, which home weather, which home environment is the one that I want to be expressing and exploring. But when I saw autumn, it was kind of obvious to go with that because autumn was, there's something quite Polish to me about the autumn as well. There's a specific phrase which is Polska Złota Jesień, which is Polish golden autumn, which is supposed to designate that, lovely sort of October of the year, which is, again, as I say, objectively the best time of year. So it was a lot to do with me missing home, frankly, as well. So it was an exercise in nostalgia in my case. So 5 words that I would choose, my favorite probably, would be wonna, which is fragrant. So I will give you the Polish word and the English definition. Żniwa, which is a time of gathering, reckoning, and preparation, so harvest. Blask, which is diffused low light, preferably golden, so glow. Maybe also wilgoć, which is water where it shouldn't be, which is damp. And I think the last one, which I think is sort of sums up autumn for me, is przelotne, which is temporary, of showers or remembrance.
That's lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Izdihar? Maybe you didn't hear. Izdihar, could you tell us your words?
Yes, can you hear me all right?
Yep.
I'm afraid I couldn't say the same. I could hear Marta loud and clear, but unfortunately I missed big chunks of what everybody has said, to my loss, I'm sure. I'm like Marta, I was not given a choice. My job was passed, and for me it was absolutely perfect because as a Libra I do not actually choose. So yeah, it was really safe. Path was easy for me, I thought. When Jessica contacted me about the project, I had just decided to move out of the country, and I was at the time living in Scotland. So using the prompt past, I really just thought on my own kind of history and where I had lived throughout my life. And so 5 of the words that I have chosen are, the first one is taboo, and I have to clarify it comes from Arabic. And maybe I should give the definition here, or at least a part of it describes the phenomenon for those who are not familiar with it. It's a type of dust storm, and as I said, the name does come from Arabic, which raises I think a very interesting translation point, which maybe I'll come back to in a bit once I've gone through this from other places that I have lived in the past. So haboob is one of the words that says, and the other word is hard, and that's a Scottish word describing a specific fault that we have in Scotland. And my third word that I would talk about today is sleep, which again reflects Scotland, and hail. The last word that I have chosen is muddy. And while I don't feel that way always about Southeast Asia, it does feel like that sometimes in the past year and a half that I've been living there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Nikhat.
Like Marta, I did have a few prompts to choose from too. And the Bangla word was a bit easier for me because it reminds me that I'm cooking the house every single day. And the prompt that I chose for Bangla was joy. And joy Bangla is a very popular phrase that was coined during the language movement, and that took place in 1952. So there was a lot of political relevance in that, so that's why I wanted to choose that. But also because weather in Bangladesh is a little bit more complicated, because we have 6 seasons. So I kind of thought choosing one season would probably not be fair. So one of the words that I chose is Janvi. So Janvi is a very popular name, and there's lots of literary relevance to this. It means moonlight, but it's a very specific type of moonlight, and it's sort of hard to explain outside of the Bengali context, but it's kind of seen as very poetic and very romantic to use that word. So you could say Chader Alo, which is literally moon's light, but Chandni is used when you want to seem a bit more romantic or a bit poetic. Another word that I chose is Damun, and it's kind of an alliteration. It basically means pitter patter. So monsoon is one of the seasons in Bangladesh and like in other South Asian countries too. And here in the UK we kind of dread rain, but over there people actually love it. They welcome it, and it's something that's celebrated. And another word is gungun, means humming, but it can refer to a person humming, but it can also mean like birds humming, or any living thing that kind of makes a humming sound. You use that word for it. But there are also very specific words for each thing humming. But this is just one word that kind of is an umbrella for everything. Now, working on Urdu was a bit more difficult, and the reason that is because Bangladesh and Pakistan have such a intertwined, but also very kind of conflicted and sometimes a little bit hostile kind of relationship. And just in my family history, my grandparents were born in British India. Then most of my mom and dad's siblings were born in Pakistan, and then So my parents were then born in Bangladesh, and me and my siblings were born here. So there's a very kind of like back and forth between two languages. Because everyone's education has been different. So with the Urdu, I had to speak to friends and get them to kind of double check everything. And they had a lot to say. So I'll tell you my words first. First one I'd like to share with you is Aatish, which means a fire, that's correct. Is Banjar Asma, which means barren skies. And another one is Das Mosam, which means gloomy weather. Now, all three of these words are not used in common daily language, but till this day, they're used in poems, in literature, in movies. So the friends that I got to cross-reference this kind of believe that I shouldn't use these words, but I wanted to keep these words alive just beyond the Urdu dictionary sphere, and I thought it was apt to use it here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. But I think we've got a sense of how difficult it must have been to translate, because there's such a layer of personal experience in these choices of words. So much culture, so much sort of, the literary connotations, the poetic connotations. How do you translate this? So can you tell us a little bit about the difficulties, but also what did you, I think what I'm most interested in is, what did you learn? What extra gain did you get through translation? And I'm just asking anyone who would like to start with this.
I did email Jessica at one point, and I was like, it can't be done. It's an impossible task. Particularly the word cloy, which, like...
That was my word too.
Yeah, I know.
I wrote that word in English.
I was cursing you. But it's I don't know, it kind of revealed how we were trying to kind of bring languages together to do kind of the same, to kind of find a kind of common point where there wasn't one. Like, so your theme was home, wasn't it? And cloy was kind of like that. It's just cloy kind of combines so many different meanings that when you then put it into other languages, it's just like they don't do it. So I just like to register that complaint now.
What did I tell you?
I can't remember.
I think I said that was the point, right?
Okay,
Like, just run with it. You choose what fits for you.
Yes. So don't expect any of the translations to be, they're dreamy. That's what he said.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Don't rely on this as an actual dictionary. That's what I think so.
So there is definitely a loss, but
Yeah.
is there also a gain?
I think there is. Like there are different games in all of it. Yeah, because we're all kind of introducing kind of our own things all the time, just as much as we're kind of unable to transfer other meanings across.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
I think Nikhat has.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Nikhat.
Nikhat, go ahead.
Hi. So one difficulty that I've kind of experienced with language in general is kind of feeling like I don't have the authority to translate. And that's kind of hard to explain, but I think most of it is due to the fact that I've kind of grown outside of the cultures that we speak these languages. But I think through working on this project, I think I was able to understand the fluidity of language and kind of see that, the language doesn't really belong to, a person or a place, but instead I think it belongs to the speaker and the person who understands it. And I think that's something that I was able to gain through this, to be proud that I can speak languages and that I do understand it in a way that perhaps people didn't. I think that's been quite an enlightening process.
Well, that's great. So to a certain extent then, has it done what Jessica wanted? Has it created a sort of treasure chest of words that help you communicate across cultures about weather? Or
Sorry. I think it definitely has. I think now I'm a bit more mindful about using. So if like before, if I was speaking to a family member in Uganda, I would always mention certain things in English. Not because I didn't know what the word was, but because I felt uncomfortable, like maybe it doesn't sound right, or maybe they're going to think that it's weird that I'm using this word. But I think now I'm just a lot more comfortable using language and speaking to people about their experiences.
Great. Jessica, do you want to? No. Okay. We'll come back to all this, I'm sure. But let's move on for now, and let's think about the next step. So the next step, Jessica and Claudia, was to move on from translating, from finding the words, translating the words, translating into soundscapes. Can you talk about how that worked? Yeah.
It's not quite that straightforward.
Okay. Yeah.
And again, the beauty about working on this project was that Michael came to me and said, here are 1,000 words, what would you do with them? So again, it was this kind of proposition that was really exciting. In the installation, we do use the words, but we use other sounds as well. But I chose not to use all 1,000 words, but only the 100 initial words, because I didn't really want it to become necessarily understandable for everyone, because that's the thing, not everybody speaks the same language. But in terms of translation, in a way, the beauty of music is that although it directly speaks to your emotions, wherever you think your emotions are located, but nobody expects it to have specific meaning. With language, everybody expects it to have specific meaning, and this project shows, well, it just doesn't. It's like, it just doesn't have that. So in a way, what I wanted to do with the sound piece is not so much translate one word into a particular sound. It was more of thinking about how weather makes us feel physically, and then trying to find sounds that kind of make us feel the same way. And I think that was it really. And I think the beauty is, it might sound like a really big leap between language and music, sound and environment, but it's not if we think about how the environment shapes the way we speak. And of course, it's kind of a little bit, I know it's kind of debated, but there are lots of linguists who feel that languages that come from hunter-gatherer backgrounds don't have lots of F's and V's in it, because you wouldn't have an overbite that we have from agricultural lifestyles, and so we still have an overbite, and hunter-gatherers would just have that because they have to bite on things, or that languages that come from warm areas use more vowels, and languages that come from colder areas have more consonants. This is all still debated, but the point is there is so many indications that actually the environment, the climate, the weather that surrounds us shapes the sounds that we make as animals, but even further that come into our language. So yeah, I think it's all in the sort of same space. So it wasn't a crazy translation task as such. It seemed very natural, and it was just so nice because I started working with the words, and some languages I speak, some are similar to, so I can understand them, like I don't speak Spanish, but I understood certain things. Mandarin, for example, I could find no way of thinking what that is and what that word might be, and I left that for a while because I thought that was really nice to work with this, the slippage between semantic meaning and sound. That sounds beautiful, and sort of like, and then the language is in between, which I kind of could understand, but couldn't quite understand. And I loved that slippage, and I tried to bring that into the sound piece as well. This kind of sort of thinking, no, I don't know.
I think that's exactly what you've got across. I mean, that's certainly what I had. I experienced this thinking that I understood something, and then no, I didn't, and no, and then you sort of relax and you let go, because it's not about understanding. And so what you call slippage. But even with the sounds, I felt, am I listening to rain, or is it the crickle of heat, or everything becomes sort of ambiguous.
Yeah, and I deliberately didn't record any weather.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So yeah, there is no field recording of weather. The only two things that are kind of underwater sounds, but they're also quite heavily kind of treated. And then there is the blackbird that sings in the staircase. So that's my concession to it. But all the other sounds you hear are instrumental sounds. Sort of one crackling that you might hear is a loosened cello bow, and if you hold it over the strings and you rotate it, it gives a crackle, and you hear some sort of sounds on it. So I worked with sounds like that maybe evoke it but aren't it.
So it's the listener who provides the images, and
yeah,
brilliant. Maybe we can listen to a short piece. Maybe if you could do the media tune. Maybe that wasn't entirely sort of typical of...
No, it's not. I mean, I'll share this with you. And no, you're putting it online, everybody will know. No, but in the installations throughout the library are sort of connected to weather Met Office data. So they change depending on the weather. But in the periodicals room, every week that changes, and it changes very subtly. And at the beginning there's not very much language in it, and that grows over the years. So it depends when you listen to it, it will be a very different piece. So the first week's piece compared to weeks 36 or something like that is very different from each other, and the voice is sort of like come out, and then I won't tell you what they do. To come
We'll just have to go back and march.
Exactly.
Oh, brilliant. So you already sort of alluded to where it is, and I think that's really, really important. But it's the installation is up on the 4th, 5th, 6th floor, and you are surrounded there by you look outside, you see the clouds go by. You have the the trees almost beating against the windows. You are very much surrounded by weather, and you have that sort of feeling of being in the weather. But on the other hand, of course, I also felt this is a library, you know, and I wonder whether there was, Jessica, this idea that there are different ways of knowing, and that the integration of knowing played a role.
Yeah, I mean, I think fairly early on we had this idea that whatever this was going to become, we wanted it to have sound. And then when we thought a bit about like spaces where it could function, I always wanted it to have that sort of, you know, when I say we talked initially about calling it an intimate dictionary for weather, I always wanted it to be that feeling of like someone whispering the weather into your ear. And so one of the earliest things we came up with was like, well, what if you put this in a library? And that's partly because we were thinking of a dictionary, but partly because we thought it would be a bit wacky to put some sound in a library. And then, of course, Claudia, you know, made the full sound piece, and we sort of found the partnership with Senate House. I feel like you were much more involved in sort of figuring out how that would be installed throughout the space. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it was like, I mean, at the beginning, there was no space. So it was kind of like, what can we make with this? And it was like, sort of, I mean, I know it says, you know, 1,000 words of weather by Jessica and Claudia, but actually it should have Michael on there as well, because the conversations that we had back and forth of the ideas, and then the suggestions, and the we came to the library a lot, didn't we? And just sort of like stood in different places, decided where it would be. So it was this, it was very sort of organic and working with the space rather than saying, this is our idea, let's plonk it into the library. The library really informed a lot of my musical choices as well. I didn't sort of make anything final until we really knew how it was going to be experienced. And then each space suggested the use of different sounds because of the physicality of it. You couldn't put what is in the staircase into one of the reading rooms and vice versa, you know? So it's the space also gave us clues of how to create this.
It's the space, but it's also the give and take, the sort of dialogue between books and the sort of sensory knowledge, isn't it? And so I think it works very well that that it's complemented by this exhibition of library books. Yeah. And these library books are really, you know, quite amazing, aren't they? They are real treasures. I just noted down here Francis Bacon, History of Winds of 1648, The Rules of Weather by a Shepherd of Banbury, who really was a shepherd, Cloud Poems by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and my personal favorite, a narrative from a balloon excursion around Chester from 1785. Absolutely fantastic. How, Jessica, you chose, were you involved in the choice of
wasn't,
this?
no, actually, so that was Artangel working with the library, and I think that was when we talked about the project initially, you know, it was very much premised on this idea of like, how do we communicate with one another? And I loved that the whole project came together collaboratively, because it was, you know, when Michael approached me, he was like, do you want to make something? And I was like, can I bring in a whole group of other people to actually make this with? And I really like the idea that the installation itself was then complemented by this exhibit that then got to bring in, you know, the team from the library and Artangel to work together to then, you know, to put that in the space and to figure out, okay, well, how do you take this word and sound exhibition and then translate that into, okay, let's work with our collection to find the thing that balances it. And so, I don't know, I just love that there were these like many layers that were spurred on from the beginning. Yeah.
Worked extremely well. Maybe there was...
I think Marta would
Okay.
like to just add something.
Yep.
Just wanted to say one thing, that phrase that we used of different ways of knowing, that really struck me. And I think what was my very strong impression during this project was how easily knowledge translates into empathy. I think because all of the 10 words and their definitions were so beautifully written and so evocative, I found it very easy to sort of imagine those 10 different spaces that the 10 different words were from. And I think that created this feeling of being very aware of how material and real those other realities are. I don't know if that makes sense. But I think in terms of, in the context of, climate change and climate breakdown, I think it's incredible how little knowledge is enough to instill that sort of feeling of, yes, this is a real place, this is a real process that's happening, this is a real, this is the temperature on someone else's skin, this is the water that their crops have drowned in. It was a very strong feeling of, empathy and sympathy somehow, of being very deeply sort of immersed in those places that maybe I've never been to, but that were so beautifully described by very few words, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much, yes. So I think in the Artangel initial brief, but also later on, there was this idea that it is an important moment now to talk about this. It is important for the arts and the humanities to talk about it together. So do you have the sense that you have achieved some kind of connection, some kind of awareness, some kind of consciousness that wasn't there before? I mean, have you heard any feedback from people who've been in the installation, or just your own feelings?
I've heard very positive feedback, which is nice. But I think, the thing I've been struck by the most is, I guess this underscored for me the challenge in that act of translation that I saw everyone do, including Claudia bringing this into sound. When you were all working on this across languages, it was funny because everyone came back and said, okay, this part has been really challenging, or you could see where something was really natural for someone to translate and they could really find those connections. And I think that for me was really interesting in this moment when we're tasked with that challenge of as Marta said, creating that empathy when we think about, climate breakdown, when we think about weather as personal. Mm-hmm. And I think, you could see we did it across a spreadsheet, so I could see people working on the spreadsheet, and there was that, like a Google shared sheet. We made all 1,000 words in, and there was something really special, I think, in that act of seeing each other work with each other's very precious creations, the words, right? And that was, I think, really powerful.
Yeah, that is a real connection, yes.
Yeah, I think the thing that is also kind of important is that this is not like an end product of something. Like this is a continuation of a discussion and an exchange, and I think what we want is people to come away from that, not say, oh, I've seen that tick, but for the conversation to continue, and even if it's sort of befuddling, that's actually good, that's great, what did I just hear, why, and what's it about, and that to continue, that conversation that you as poets all had amongst each other, it'd be nice if then people who see it continue that amongst them.
And I loved that idea that people could confront it, and they might not speak 9 of the languages in the project, but they might speak one of them, and that would give them the access into the world of this dictionary, so to speak. Yeah.
Fantastic. I see the time running away, so I think I'd like to open out to questions from the audience at this point, because there are lots of other questions I'd like to ask, but I'm sure there are points you'd like to raise as well.
Don't be shy.
Please.
Sorry, I wanted to ask, is it audio?
Yes.
Yeah, I've got glasses on. I wanted to just ask if, considering when you kind of said, well, there was, when you were the sound you're using was the cello, or it's a string instrument. Has anybody made any comment and said, "Oh, what weather sound was that? I think it was this," and decided it was something to do with weather, and have made their own decisions on what it was?
Yeah.
They have.
Yeah, they have. And I love it because it's different from person to person. And all I do is say, yeah, absolutely. Because I wanted to, because we, in this dictionary, we found out that weather is so personal because weather is bodily, right? You feel heat, you feel the damp, you smell the air, and it depends on the way you sense the world. That it is a very personal experience. So everybody chose these very personal words, and so I didn't want to make something that was sort of didactic. That way you could say, oh yeah, now it's thunder. Oh, and that's rain. I didn't want that. So it's, yeah, absolutely. And people do like spotting things. It's just human nature. So that's fine. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Can I just ask, in a sense, this is a transformative experience to go to to listen to the sound, to listen to the poets, to listen to the translations. In a sense, it makes you think very differently about translation. It makes you think differently about time. It makes you think about the way in which we're all interconnected. You think of translation not as one medium to another, but as points within a transition that can't be actually separated. So it is absolutely transformative. So I'd just like to ask people how they experience a sense of transformation, which without doubt this installation conveys.
I mean, I personally, I was just showing Jessica something that I'm reading at the moment, a book whose author is
David Haskell. David Haskell's new book about sound.
About sound. Read it. If you it's wonderful. And in that, there's a beautiful sentence where he talks about words on paper that you're reading, that they are encryptions of sounds, of vibrations in air. So he says it's air made ink. And so, he talks about that transformation of different things into different media. And we are made to do that, right? We're constantly, and he then goes on to say, like, when we read a word, it instantly, the visual sense kicks in, but then that directly kicks into our listening sense. So even if you're silently reading your sound, where you process sound in your brain, is just activated. So we can't help kind of be multimodal creatures that constantly translate everything into everything else. So I think that's for me, not transduction. It's late.
Yeah, because of the constant ambiguity of it all, it never stops. Yeah. That's very well. I'd like to thank you all very much. This was fantastic. I've learned a lot. It was a really nice conversation. Just to say that there's another event that also goes with the installation, and that's on the 26th of October, and it'll be entitled Weather, Words and the Body. So if you're interested, do come along to that. And have me thank the panel.